Hello, good morning, and welcome to the DockerCon recap session, recapping the announcements made at DockerCon San Francisco 2018. My name is Oliver Pomeroy, and I'm part of the solutions engineering team here at Docker. As we go through the presentation, you can ask any questions on the right-hand side in the questions panel, and a couple of my colleagues are standing by to answer those. After this webinar, we'll be posting the recording online, as well as sharing the screen and sharing the slides. Okay. In this morning's session, we plan to do a bit of an update on Docker Inc., and then go through the various announcements made at the DockerCon conference, starting with some for the data center and our cloud products, and then moving through to our developer and developer solutions. Okay, so getting started, a bit of an update on Docker. We recently passed our 5th year anniversary, and where Docker all started was the simple idea of making a Linux container very easy to use, very easy to consume. Fast forward 5 years, Docker now are in a position where we're helping customers containerize applications across all types of operating systems and across all types of infrastructure, from Linux workloads to the Windows workloads, helping customers modernize their existing data centers, helping customers move their workloads to the clouds and get more from public clouds. You're finding containers today across the board. In the past year alone, we've seen huge momentum in the Docker project, both 1 million new developers coming on board, downloading our Docker for desktop products and getting started in containerizing applications. We've seen over 1 million new applications uploaded to our Docker Hub, a place to share content and share containers. And even today, right now, we're on about 1 billion container downloads every 2 weeks from that hub. So there is still huge momentum in the Docker project and a constant amount of people containerizing applications and sharing and taking advantage of containerization. At the same time, we're starting to see all sorts of communities starting to branch out around containerization, and Docker here are embracing all of these. For example, in the past year alone, we've come closer to the Kubernetes community, both with code contributions, as well as integrating Kubernetes at the core of some of our products, both our desktop and our enterprise. At the same time, we've started to see governing bodies starting to appear, like the CNCF, and Docker are working alongside these bodies, for example, contributing code and contributing projects to those foundations. And we still think this is a very exciting time, and there'll be more open source communities to come, and we're ready to embrace and to work with them. But one of the things that we kind of announced at DockerCon was the Docker promise. One of the core beliefs in everything we're doing now in Docker are around these 3 pillars. Everything we do, choice is at heart around the products we make and the code we ship. Around helping you guys achieve agility and ensuring security is always at the forefront of our engineering thoughts. From the choice perspective, we're committed to making sure that you're not locked in. When you start to move your applications into containers, you're not locked into any stack, any operating system, any cloud, any infrastructure. We're working towards standards, and we've seen standards now managed by external governing bodies. And we're also making sure that you're not locked in. So when you make that decision to move to cloud, you're not locked into specific vendors. Or when you make that decision to move to new operating systems, you have that ability and that flexibility to change at any point. And as we go forward, this is going to be an absolute core principle to every product that we make, giving you guys choice around where you run your workloads and when. We've also have the promise of agility, and this is all around making it easier. And one of the core Docker beliefs is making it easier to develop applications, making it easier to ship code, and making it easier to share your products and your containers with internal and external end users. And so we're making sure now that containers can be easily shared through our registries and our hub products, making sure that our products can integrate better with your automation processes, your pipeline processes, and at the end of the day, making it easier to ship and develop code. And that third core pillar from us is the idea of security. Security is one of those things in containerization where we originally had a lot of myths to unbust. And we're making sure that security is at the heart of everything we do. making sure that the applications you develop in containers are run securely, that the data both in and outside of the container is handled securely, making that when you're starting to develop your applications, you can integrate them into some secure software development processes and secure software supply chains. And we're making sure that security is pervasive across all of those platforms. Doesn't get in the way, makes it very easy to consume, and something you don't actually have to think about, but just have confidence that security is there and at heart of our products. Those 3 core principles are in everything we do, including our Docker Enterprise Edition product. Docker Enterprise Edition is our container as a service platform. We see this now as a container as a service platform that can run across any infrastructure, no matter where you're wanting to run your containers. We can happily run across on-premise, off-premise, bare metal, cloud, even edge devices. Docker gives you the ability to abstract away from that underlying infrastructure. And also at the top there, we're confident that any application can run in a container, whether that's traditional applications that have been lifted and shifted through our modernized traditional application program, whether that's new modern microservices, edge computing, off-the-shelf applications. We're now even starting to see some new wave applications like big data, ML, and AI workloads, maybe serverless workloads. All of those types of applications are being ran in containers on top of Docker Enterprise Edition, which enables you to abstract away from that underlying operating system and underlying infrastructure. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. And today at DockerCon, we boasted that we have around 500 Docker Enterprise Edition customers, and we had some great examples of people like McKesson talking about how their processes, their applications have been modernized, moving to Docker. And there's some great use cases and references online to see how customers are taking advantage of Docker Enterprise Edition. Okay, so now moving forward to what we announced and some of the new products coming out of Docker. As I mentioned, these slides will be made available to you so that the links on the screen can be shared. But there were 4. I'm going to cover 4 key announcements in this presentation. On the data center and cloud side, we announced the Federated Application Management, an ability to start to move workloads between multiple Enterprise Edition clusters. We've talked about how we're extending Kubernetes to Windows Server. For the developer side, we announced how we're making it easier for applications to be developed in wizard and template-driven workflows. And we're also talking about how we can make applications easier to define in the Docker Compose format. Okay, now let's jump in and talk about those in a bit more detail. So starting with the Federated Application Management product. We're out there talking to customers, and we ran some surveys, and everybody out there today is wanting to go down some level of hybrid cloud, multi-cloud story. The idea that they don't want to be locked into one particular place and expect workloads to move across the various clouds as and when they're required or on a project-by-project basis. But today, that is not that easy. Every level of infrastructure has its own unique set of APIs, has its own unique set of features, and that it's not easy to kind of abstract your workloads and your applications away from that, giving you portability. Now, containers started out on this journey. Containers as a packaging format allowed you to ship your code and move your code between various places. However, the management of containers really isn't as portable as the code itself. We're finding customers starting to build a lot of custom implementations, custom scripts to deploy containers in their various infrastructures and their various clouds. And we here at Docker wanted to make a way for customers to abstract away the management of containers from the various infrastructure platforms, giving you true agility. So at the DockerCon conference, we announced the Federated Application Manager. The Federated Application Manager is a product that sits on top of all of the various Kubernetes clusters that can be ran either on-premise or off-premise, and provides you a secure federated content distribution network, as well as a place to automate the governance across those multiple clouds. You can then start to deploy your applications to the Federated Application Manager and move it to wherever you want your workloads to run. If today you want to deploy those workloads on an Enterprise Edition cluster on-premise, you can do. And then tomorrow, if you wanted to move that workload to, I don't know, the Amazon EKS infrastructure, that is no problem. The Docker Enterprise Edition software here will help with the movement of that software, the movement of the content, as well as all of the governance and automation around that in terms of things like access control and security. When customers are starting to move to the clouds or are starting to move across multiple clouds, we're finding that it's a really hard task to find a place to centrally store your applications and centrally store your data. We think the Docker Trusted Registry has a huge advantage here. And through its image scanning, image signing, and things like its image mirroring and caching capabilities, we're able to create a secure supply chain in one central place and then share the content to all of the various places you want to run your infrastructure, all driven and managed now by the Federated Application Manager. Additionally, as I talked about, we're also finding it's very hard to put in a governance and a policy-based program on top of all of these Kubernetes distributions and container platforms. The Federated Application Management layer here will provide security, governance, and policy-based automation across your environments. It provides an aggregated view of your clusters, provides an aggregated view of your applications, and then you basically get a nice web user interface to click and choose where you want your applications to run at any one time. Now, I got a short demonstration here just to show you what that looks like. Okay, and this is the short demonstration that was shown live on the keynote. We'll first off start out by looking at what the application looks like today deployed on our on-premise infrastructure. As you can see, this is the Docker Enterprise Edition dashboard, and you can see that I have a pet store application deployed as a stack. If I looked in the Kubernetes load balancers, you can see that there are multiple Kubernetes services deployed for this application. And you can see if I browse it, it is a pretty simple Java Spring application just deployed in containers. We've made a nice addition to the application that it would represent what the infrastructure is underneath it through that large blue logo there at the bottom. So now we hit our first challenge. I have my application deployed on premise. I have my application deployed in Docker Enterprise Edition. I have a second Enterprise Edition cluster deployed in a different region, maybe I don't know, in a different continent or a different layer infrastructure. How do I migrate my workloads between these two Docker Enterprise Edition clusters? Well, this is a use case where the Federated Application Manager can help. If I open up the dashboard of the Federated Application Manager for the first time, you will see that I have two clusters. I have an on-premise. You'll see that I had an on-premise and a cloud cluster. Both of those have already been deployed and have been added in to the Federation software. If I look under the Applications tab now, you will see that I have my one application, that pet store application, defined here. And you can clearly call out and see it is made up of those two containers, a web layer and a database layer. We even extract the Docker Compose file, which is how this application is defined inside of this tool. So I have my one application and I have my two clusters. And what we can do now is start to migrate that application from one site to a second site, all through this one tool. You haven't had to worry about user management or any of the image migration between those two clusters. Just clicking on the Clusters tab here, you can see that it was deployed on-premise. Clicking the Migrate button, I can specify where it is today, where I want it to go, and as simple as click Migrate. Behind the scenes, we will take the Compose file deployed on that second cluster, and we'll also handle migrating or pulling down those images on that second site, possibly through things like remote caches. Now, if I open up that same website again through a globally distributed load balancer, you can now see that application is running on that second site, but the big blue logo at the bottom is now pointing to a cloud cluster rather than an on-premise cluster. It was that quick and easy now to move an application between multiple Docker EE clusters. Okay, well, that's a start, but what happens if I'm wanting to start to use some of the public cloud software as a service clusters? Recently, Amazon have generally available to EKS, Azure's AKS, and Google's GKE are all public cloud Kubernetes distributions that customers are wondering if they should start taking advantage of. But the question becomes, how do I move my workloads between these Kubernetes distributions without being locked in? Once again, the Federated Application Manager can help here. And in this short demonstration, we'll kind of show how you could add in those clusters into the Application Manager and how to move workloads to them. We're going to start off by logging into those various clusters. So I'll log into my Azure cluster here, just running get nodes. You can see that I am talking now to an Azure cluster. All we have to do on an existing Kubernetes environment is deploy a list of resources, some containers here, some roles, which will then automatically plummet back in to the Federated Application Manager. Just for purposes of the demonstration, we can also jump to a Google cluster. Once again, proving that I'm now talking to a Google cluster. And I can add that using the same command into the same tool. Awesome. So switching now to the Application Manager again, we can see here that I have multiple clusters available to me. No longer do I have just EE on-premise and EE in the cloud. I also have the ability to see the GKE cluster, the Azure cluster, as well as an Amazon EKS cluster, all sat here behind the scenes. I now no longer have to worry about the all the governance around those various clusters, who has access, the various tokens, things like that. I have one central place to deploy my applications across multiple clouds, across multiple regions, across multiple Kubernetes clusters. So how would I deploy a workload across both Docker EE and these public cloud clusters? So once again, a quick demonstration of the pet store, and we've clicked on the pet store application. Here I'm able to click deploy, click the various regions. So in this case, click AKS, click GKE. Simple as that. And now I will take those Kubernetes objects and my Docker container images from my registry and push those out across those various other infrastructure platforms. And the clusters now, you should see this application is no longer just deployed on the cloud, it's actually deployed across the various GKE, EKS, and AKS clusters. I've now put in a level of governance, a level of control across these public cloud resources. Okay. Moving now on to one of the second things we announced during the day one keynote at DockerCon. And this was Windows support for Kubernetes. Docker Entreprise Edition is well known for its ability to support multiple operating systems in one platform. And today we support a variety of enterprise Linux distributions, from SUSE to Red Hat to Oracle Linux, as well as some open source Linux distributions like Ubuntu and CentOS. And we are also the only container as a service platform today that supports Windows Server. Docker and Microsoft have a close engineering relationship and have really been leading the market in Windows containers. Look at the kind of the timeline here. Back in October 2014, both Docker and Microsoft started joint engineering on porting Linux containers to Windows. When Windows Server 2016 shipped in September 2016, we now had the ability to start and stop Docker containers on the Windows Server for the first time. And this was part of the joint engineering effort to re-engineer elements of the Windows kernel and port the Docker codebase across to Windows. In August 2017, Docker announced the support now to actually mix Windows and Linux containers in the same cluster. Taking advantage of our Docker Swarm capability here, you were able to create hybrid applications across Windows and Linux, all in the same place through the same management and governance processes, all through Docker Enterprise Edition. What we announced in DockerCon now was taking this functionality one step further and giving customers the choice of orchestrator for their hybrid workloads. And this is through the addition of Kubernetes on Windows Server with Docker Enterprise Edition. Now within your clusters, you will have the ability to not only choose which infrastructure to deploy your applications, or which operating system to deploy your applications, but now at the same time, another layer of choice, which orchestrator to choose. So you can decide whether to deploy your application via Swarm or via Kubernetes, decide whether to deploy your application via Windows or via Linux, and of course, across all of those various infrastructure platforms that can sit beneath them. If you're interested in either of the Federated Application Manager or Kubernetes on Windows Server, when those products ship later this year, you can sign up to the beta now on beta.docker.com. Okay, so now moving through from the server, the cloud, and the data center side across to our developer tooling. The first product we announced in this space on the day one keynote at DockerCon was the Application Designer. The Docker on the Desktop product is something that now we've been shipping for a couple of years, and it provides a way for developers to get started very, very quickly with Docker. Docker for Desktop is available for Mac and for Windows, and it avoids the works on my machine. Developers can create containers locally using these developer tools, and then start to move those containers to a registry, to the hub, going through the application lifecycle. We're starting to see it really speeds up the time for customers to get, or developers to get started with Docker, as they're able to get started directly on their desktop without external tools, without the need to talk to, develop locally. The way that Docker for Desktop works is all through a lightweight virtual machine that runs on your Windows or your Mac machine, providing you a Linux kernel to create your Linux containers. But we've done some great things around optimizing the file system, so you can share your application code from your local machine into Docker for Desktop, as well as done some great work on the networking side. So as you start to create your applications in Docker for Desktop, you can access them on your local machine through web browsers, through existing tooling installed there. Even something we announced at the previous DockerCon in October is we included Kubernetes in Docker for Desktop. Now with the tick of a tick box, you can have a fully running single node Kubernetes cluster running locally on your laptop. You don't have to worry about spinning up developer clusters in clouds or anything like that. If you need to get up and running to develop your application for Kubernetes, you can do so through Docker for Desktop, through the Kubernetes integration. And one thing to note, this is a certified Kubernetes distribution through the various certification processes of Kubernetes. However, one comment we've often come back when customers are starting to use Docker for Desktop is it's great, it's really powerful, it's really easy for me to get up and running and develop applications. However, it can often be I have to go away and read some reference guides, understand the various Docker commands, and get really into the CLI. We took that feedback on board and tried to find a way to make developing applications on Docker a lot easier, maybe wizard-driven, and hopefully through a graphical user interface. And that's exactly what we did. At DockerCon in the keynote there, we demonstrated the wizard-driven tooling now to create applications locally. You now get the option to choose existing pre-created templates, and these could be pre-existing templates for full application stacks. So there could be multiple containers that sit behind them. You then get the ability to customize those applications and containers. So if you wanted to change the versioning, I don't know, add in your code, change environmental variables, add new containers to the stack, you can do. And then out the back of this, you will have a fully running stack on your local development machine, as well as a Docker Compose file or Docker containers to share with the rest of your infrastructure to move the application from desktop to production. This product will be completely integrated inside of Docker for Desktop. We'll have a list of existing templates for you to choose your applications, or if you wanted to start from scratch and create your own application, you absolutely can do. Wizard-driven now, making it a lot easier to get up and running, and both for Docker files and Compose files. We're even working now with some of the leading IDEs to make this integrated closer to a developer's workflow, integrating into some of the existing IDE tooling out there to make it easier to build Docker containers, build Compose files, build Docker files, and ship applications from desktop to production. Okay. And now moving forward onto describing applications. Once customers once developers have started to create containers the next question becomes, how do I start to define my applications in code? I want a way in clear text, in simple language here to define my applications. And the Compose format has been the de facto for some time. There are millions of examples of Compose files today uploaded to GitHub and other source control. And it's been a really nice, easy way to get started in defining applications and sharing those applications through your various environments and your various teams. It is a simple text format. It's pretty straightforward. It's applicable. You can then start to define multiple services of your application. So if you had, for example, 2 tiers or 3 tiers, you could define all of that in one place. And there is a nice tool set to get up and running, either through the Docker Stack deploy or the Docker Compose CLI. You have one command to start up your full application and its various services within. One of the things we announced in October at our conference in Copenhagen was that we had done the work now to port Compose to Kubernetes. So if you are a developer who has already created Docker Compose files, and as we talked about there, we know that there are millions of customers out there that have done so, but are wanting to start to take advantage of Kubernetes, we have made it easier to translate Docker Compose files into the backend Kubernetes objects that run on your clusters. We have done this today through our Docker for Desktop products and our Docker Enterprise Edition products. Therefore, you could take an existing Compose file that you've already written. You've not had to add any custom variables or change any flags. Through the Docker Stack deploy command line, this will now deploy against a Kubernetes cluster. So here in the screenshot, you can see that we're using a Compose file called words. We're able to create 3 services running on Kubernetes. And these would be full deployments that are exposed via services, or whatever you really define inside of your Compose file, providing you a simple programming language to write your applications, and also meaning that existing applications don't have to be rewritten if you are changing between orchestrators. Once again, taking advantage of that choice mantra. One of the reasons why we went through the work of porting Docker Compose onto Kubernetes, we wanted a higher level description language. We often found that people defining applications for Kubernetes were writing an awful lot of YAML, manifest YAML, and it was reasonably hard it took an awful lot of lines of code to define your application. And it was also quite a complex and low level language really to define your applications. Compose had done a great job of making it easier to understand and making it relatively easy to write. And so what we have done now is ported Compose, as I said, across to both Swarm and Kubernetes. And so once you've written those Compose, you can really choose where you run it and when you run it. One of the things we have done now with, one of the things we announced at DockerCon, we have taken this one step further. And this is through our application package software. One of the feedback we got from Compose was that it is good, it is great. However, I wanted a way to extract away the environmental variables from my Compose files. I wanted to make it easier to move my Compose files between various environments. At the same time, what happens if I wanted to find a way to convert my Compose files into alternative languages or other packaging formats? And so the Docker application software, which is available today on GitHub, I'll browse to the URL in a second, provides a way to abstract your application code from the environmental variables. And it also provides a way to convert Docker Compose files to Helm charts. And we're seeing Helm as more and more of a way for customers to deploy workloads onto Kubernetes. The Compose format is a nicer way to define the applications, but you can use it to convert to Helm for runtime and deployment. As I talked about earlier, this is a completely open source project. It is available today on GitHub to get started with. You can take your existing Compose files, convert them into a Docker app format, and can start to take advantage of the features of Docker app. I'll just browse to its URL now to kind of show some examples. So this is the repository on GitHub, and if you scroll down, you will see that we have examples now of how we can extract away, sorry, I'll stop there, extract away the variables that you would define. And so, for example, let's go to here. You could have a Compose file that looks like this, and we've left out variables like the text command or the port command. And you can then ship variable files alongside. And so you can ship a variable file that says port equals this and text equals that. Using the Docker app CLI and its render functionality, it would then create that Compose file for that environment, populating both the text, the version, and the port, depending on what's in your variable file. So you can now, at the point, have variable files for each of your environments, especially in the multi-cloud world, multi-infrastructure world, multi-cluster world. You would want a way to kind of extract those secrets from your files. The Docker Compose and the Docker app format gives you that functionality. At the same time, if you wanted to convert those files into Helm, absolutely. Through the Docker app Helm functionality, that would take the Compose files and take those variable files and create fully functioning Helm charts to use with Tiller and to share on the Helm store. Both of those are great advantages, and we're hoping to see that project really take off as a way for customers to define applications and extract and make it easier to move applications between various environments. Okay. Well, that's all I had time for in the slides. So thank you very much for attending. As I talked about, the recording of this webinar will be sent out, as well as the slides. One last thing to remember is that the next DockerCon is coming up in December. It's coming up in Europe, in Barcelona. And so you can pre-register now for an early sign-up price to take advantage of the conference and see the latest features that Docker are working on. Thank you very much for your time, and have a good day.